Happy Friday, everyone. And it is like a properly happy Friday. What an introduction that were. Ooh, Tyrone Minga. It is Friday, and it's 17 degrees. And it's going to be 17 degrees tomorrow and day after as well, which for England is great warm. I woke up this morning with loads of energy. You're going to find that you're going to have to put up with a lot of energy, because when the sun's out, fun's out. Like, I am a different person when I get some vitamin D. Right, these are books first. So if you're not bothered about what I'm about to tell you, you can skip to another video of a different content creator. These are fantasy books that I think are brilliant entry points for people that are wanting to get into fantasy. Really good, not too overwhelming. He says, well, there's a Brandon Sanderson book there. I'll explain to you why I don't think Brandon Sanderson's that daunting. He does it in a really good way. So I'll talk to you about why I think these are really good to get into fantasy. And then this is a list here of fantasy books that I really want to read. But for some reason, every time I pick up a new book, it's just not one of them. So I'm hoping you've read them, and then you'll say to me, Tyrone, the class, read them, and then I'll pick them up and read them. Before we get into the fun stuff, though, I want to remind you to be kind to people. So me, my wife, and my son went to Tesco the other day. For anyone that doesn't live in England, Tesco's like a massive superstore, or at least the one in Chesterfield's massive anyway. And we were walking, and I saw a lad at the reception, a homeless guy, begging. And as I started walking up to him, I looked in his eyes, and I thought, I recognise him. And then he did this. And I thought, that's my mate from school. Lad called Gaz, went to school with him when we were younger. Really good friends in primary school, which in England is like year 3 to 6. So you're, I don't know how old, maybe up until year 11-year-old. So probably from like 6 to 11, sounds about right. Really good friends. We used to play football together. We used to go around to his house. I know his mum really well, his brother, his sister. Really good lad. But he drifted down the wrong path as we got older, so we drifted apart. He did his own thing, I did my own thing. But anyway, I digress. He put his top up, and I says, Gaz, is that you? And he says, oh, hey up, Ty, you all right, mate? And I says, mate, please don't ever be ashamed if you see me out in public. I'd already seen him about a year ago, but he looked completely different. He has obviously been taking drugs, and he looked really gone. I couldn't recognise him initially, so I said, mate, don't ever feel ashamed when you see me. So he pulled his top down, I shook his hand, and I says, look after you, son. So me and my wife walked off, and then my wife says to me, Tyrone, I think you were crying then. I says, you sure? She says, yeah, he were. I says, right, well, you go inside with Ruben, and I'll go and have a little chat with him. So I turned around, walked back, and they were outside crying. Bear in mind, this man is sat in a public place. He's 6-year-old, he'll be, because he was a year above me at school. And he was sat crying. So I tapped him on the shoulder. I says, Gaz, what's up, mate? And he says, mate, I feel so ashamed. You know, I'm so sorry. I says, what are you sorry for? He says, that you have to see me like this. I says, mate, please don't feel sorry. You know, life could have turned out very differently for the two of us. I've had a lot of mental health problems in this last 12 months, and I'm blessed that I had a wicked wife and a fantastic foundation that's got me through it. But circumstances could have been different. I could have been sat where you are today. So I sat down with him, and anyway, we got to talking, and he just says, I don't know what to do with my life. I've got nowhere. He says, about a year ago, my house burnt down, and my partner that were in it passed away. I lost my partner, lost my house. I can't get another house through council because they've not got any. There's an housing shortage. I can't live with my mum because if I go to my mum's house, because she's under council, she'll lose accommodation or something. Council have got weird rules where you're only allowed a certain amount of people in your house. Anyway, long story short, we got to talking, and this poor lad who used to be really good friends with me at school had a stab wound from top of his leg down to bottom of his knee, where he'd been assaulted because he was homeless. He also were crying because he'd had a lump on his hand, and I mean this lump was massive. He showed it me when I was sat next to him. I says, where's that from? He says, 2 lads have just come outside, and I put my hand out asking if they had any money, and they stood on my hand. I think they broke my wrist. At this point, he's still crying. I think they broke my wrist, and the staff came out and spoke to him. They says, Gaz, are you all right? Obviously, they know him because he goes there a fair bit, and he says, yeah, I'm all right, which confirmed that he'd just been assaulted. So I just sat with him. We had a 15-20 minute chat. We cried together, and I did. I bloody cried a lot with him. This woman come up and asked if he were all right. She went and bought him a woolly hat, and she says, are you two all right? I says, I'm just crying. You know, I've got a lad here that I used to go to school with, and he's broken. And even now I'm getting upset about it, talking about it, 'cause it's horrible. But I just want you to remember that when we see some of these people, God, this is so hard to say. I am so, and you are so fortunate to be in the position that we're in. But I think life's got so comfy for so many people that we forget how blessed we are and how privileged we are to have the things that we've got. Simple things like an house with a roof over his head and double glazed windows and central heating. But also just to remember that when we see these homeless people around us town centres, because I'm guilty in past of saying, God, you know, homeless communities taking off at town centre, they're everywhere begging for stuff. Most of them are begging because they're desperate. None of these people are out there begging because they think it's fun. And yes, I know a lot of you are going to think it's for a habit. How desperate do you need to be to turn to that habit and come out on the streets begging for them? So just remember to be kind is all I want to say to you in this video. Some of these people might have done silly things in the past. Some of them might still do silly things. But I just think as human beings, I think we have an obligation to just try and be kind to people. And I don't think that's too much to ask. So if you do see someone out there suffering, elderly person, homeless person, just be bloody nice to them, because we don't know what kind of day they'll have had. Anyway, that's the inspirational part of this video, where I just wanted to remind you that we're all human. Now we'll get into book stuff and I'll be more upbeat again, because I have got a lot of energy. Them tears were just like built up energy coming out at you. What should we start with? Let's start with books that I think are really good entry points into fantasy, shall we? We'll start with Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. This one, you see a little bit on YouTube, but I don't see loads. And the people that I do see talking about it tend to be like, oh yeah, it was okay, yada, yada, yada. But these are people that have probably read a bit more epic fantasy and are trying to compare it to things like Brandon Sanderson and Wheel of Time. And I think trying to compare this to something like that is just ridiculous. It's a completely different book, and it's offering a different audience, a completely different take on fantasy. This is a story about basically like a band of brothers who are coming back together after being retired. I want you to imagine me, you know, with my man boobs and out of shape and stuff. Let's pretend that I used to be a warrior and I had a sword or an axe or something. Actually, bow and arrow, because I feel like if I ever was going to be a warrior, I'd want to do it from afar, just so I didn't get hurt. So I've got a bow and arrow, and I've retired because I want to start a family. I've got overweight because biscuits and coffee are real. And all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and one of my mates comes to me and says, "Oi, dude, my daughter's been nicked. Can we go and find her?" So I'm like, all right, yeah, no worries. I'm going to leave my wife and kids at home, and then me and my other overweight friends are going to go for like a final hoorah, and we're going to go and try and find this fella's daughter. And en route, we just have a great laugh, and it's just really funny. Like, all these characters are just really funny. They're really real. You've got a gay wizard, then some other straight fellas. One's really funny. One's a king, but didn't want to be a king. He's like, oh, thank God you saved me. My wife were horrible. Let's just go and have some fun. And they do. And there's just every kind of magical thing you can imagine. There's crystal balls, there's different sorts of animals, dragons and weird things with different heads and arms and stuff. And there's just everything. Just imagine an author's just grabbed up every single fantasy book and just gone, I'm just going to grab a bit from everywhere and stick it all together. It's going to be crazy, mad, some of it'll make no sense, but it's just a fun there and back again story. That's what this story is. It's not overcomplicated. The writing's quite simple. The characters are just funny. Some of the dialogue in here just makes you like properly, like properly laugh. And it's a fun time. It's one of them books that you can just put down and pick up. You're not going to get too like confused by it. It's just lovely. Is what I can. Yeah, lovely is the best word to describe this. Although there's some battle scenes in it that aren't like lovely. A bit gross, but it's fantasy. You're going to expect some battle scenes, aren't you? They're not going to be fighting each other with sponges. So I think this would be a really good entry point for anyone that's maybe wanting to get into fantasy but not take it too seriously, and just decide if some of the kind of tropes that are within fantasy are up your street. And John Gwynne, who is another guy that I cherish, says that it's a rollicking, page-turning, and edge-of-your-seat road trip of a book. I'd agree with that, John. I think you're absolutely right. Read it. Really good entry point to fantasy. Next up, we've actually got John Gwynne. The reason I'm going to add him into the story is because I've just started today reading The Hunger of the Gods, which is book 2 in the Bloodsworn Trilogy. Don't know why I didn't pick this up sooner. So, The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. I went into this actually scared, thinking, is this going to be too much for me? Because it's Norse inspired, so there's like Vikings and stuff. If you're into Norse stuff, then you'll love this. But if you're not into Norse stuff, I think you'll still love it anyway. There are words in there that you're probably going to be like, what does that mean? But you can just Google it. There's words like jarl and other stuff, Bringer or something, which is like a bit of male clothing that they wear. Just Google. It's really easy. In book 1, I don't think there's a glossary that tells you what everything means, but in book 2, the author just took things up a level in helpfulness. And what he did is, let me show you this. Right at the start, he gives you a cast of characters and tells you exactly who they are and how they relate to other people. But as well as doing the cast of characters, he gives you a pronunciation guide, so you know how to pronounce certain words, because I don't know about you, but I do actually read in my head. I know some people say you shouldn't read in your head because it makes you read slower, but I don't care that much about reading fast because, yeah, who cares how long it takes me to read a book, as long as I'm enjoying it. Then, yeah, so you got Bloodsworn, who are different, like, gangs within the book. I'll explain all that in a minute. But then, on top of that, as well as the characters and who everyone are, you've got a list of creatures and what the creatures are, to try and make things a bit easier for you. And then I think this is fabulous. Norse titles, terms and items. How good is that? So the author has literally given you a list of the terms that will be used within the book that are Norse terms to try and make things easier for you. How stupid would it be if the author wrote a Norse-inspired book and didn't use Norse-inspired words just to try and dumb it down for us? If you're going to try and read a book about, like, Norse history or stuff like that, then surely you want to get to know a bit about what they used to say and do. So yeah, he makes it really accessible. Not only does he do that, but I've got a terrible memory. I'll finish reading a book, and then if I come back to that book, I'll be like, oh, I ain't got a clue what happened. So I have to try and figure it out en route. This man, can you see what that says? What has come before? Yeah, he has. He's literally done me a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... 6-page prologue explaining to me the 3 main characters in the first book and exactly what they went through on their journey. So now when I start Hunger of the Gods, I know exactly where I left off and it all makes sense. It is just absolute perfection. So the story of this series, the Bloodsworn Trilogy, the reason I think this is brilliant for people that are new to fantasy is because it's only got 3 points of view. You've got Elvar, who is a girl in a gang called they're not called the Bloodsworn. She's in a gang called something else. The Battlegrim or something, I think they're called. Yeah, Elvar is in the Battlegrim. So she is a female warrior, hard as nails. The Battlegrim are a gang of people that basically go around trying to find tainted humans. So this world is set up in a place where gods used to rule. You've got like a rat god, a dragon god, a wolf god. They all used to rule, but then they all kicked off with each other. They couldn't play nice, and then they all got sent to like Jesus. So if they're gods, they got sent to the sun. Anyway, yeah, they went up there, and then gods were no longer. But they still had humans that were tainted with the power of these gods. So the Battlegrim go around finding these people and basically making money from it. So you follow her story. She's not minging. She's not an horrible person. You'd think it based on what I'm telling you, but it builds. Anyway, read the book and you'll understand. Then the next point of view that you've got is a woman called Orca, who I can't really tell you what I can't tell you that. Orca's hard as nails. She is an ex-warrior. She used to be rated hard. Her husband were rated hard. They've got a kid together and she's semi-retired, we'll say. They've just decided, we're just going to go and live out in sticks. We want a peaceful life. We don't want to deal with any of that riffraff anymore. Let's just chill out in woods. So they've gone out and done their own thing. Something really, really bad happens to her right at the start of the first book, and then she's on this mad revenge mission for the rest of the book. Fantastic story. I don't know if you've realised as well, but I've just pointed out that a male fantasy author has written 2 really strong female protagonists, which is beautiful, really. I'm not going to say that when I read a book I look for whether the character's a man or a woman. If they're a good character, they're a good character, but I will point out the fact that not many male authors choose to write predominantly strong female protagonists. So yeah, it was refreshing to see. The last character is a man called Varg, who is an escaped slave who basically something bad happens to him as well. There's a lot of bad stuff happening to these people. Something bad happens to him. He wants to find out what the cause was of this thing that happened to him. And to do that, he needs to find a cedar witch who can relive the last moments of someone's life. So his main mission is to find a witch so he can find out what happened to something or somebody that he loved. And to do so, he ends up joining the Bloodsworn, who are they called the Bloodsworn? You can understand now, can't you, why I need these books and like summaries and stuff. Yeah, they are called the Bloodsworn. So these are like a gang of retard people that go around just whooping ass, and he joins them, and the story follows him as an ex-slave with this group of retard people. And I'm not going to give any more than that because there's going to be spoilers. Look, this series is fast moving, so if I was to tell you something that happens, like it could spoil it. Just know that it is a fantastic world, fantastic setup with brilliant characters, really accessible, and the story is like these three characters slowly starting to come together in a world where gods may or may not at some point come back. Clues on the front of the covers, like, these are what the gods look like. Imagine if one of them come up to you and be like, oh, dude, do you want to fight? I think I'd just be like, well, actually, I'm an archer, aren't I? So I could fight from afar, while dragons, like, trying to breathe fire at me. I could just be like, haha, call me Legolas, my friend. Anyway, really good, really accessible. I am on book 2 now, really enjoying it. Can't wait to dive further into this and then get on to book 3. That's another class one for you. That's book 3. I don't know what that is. Massive snake or something. That's also a god. Snacker, I think it's called. Snacker, I think, is the god of snakes. Right, this next one's going to be a controversial one. It really shouldn't be. Brandon Sanderson. I know loads of people are going to say, like, oh, he's the king of fantasy. His magic systems and worlds are really intricate. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, they are. However, I think he does it in a way that's still accessible for people that are new to the genre. I honestly think the only reason people don't read Brandon Sanderson is because he's a girth monster. Like, the man puts some girth into these books. There's a lot of words. I think the word count in this is something like 350,000. But I want to try and alter your brain chemistry a little bit. Because I think as book lovers, we're going down a road where people are trying to read quantity over quality. And that's something I've done in the past, I'll be honest. I've tried to knock out as many books as I can just to put out more reviews. I'm trying in 2025 to make a conscious decision to read quality so that I enjoy my reading experience, and then I can put out there the positive stuff that I've come across. If there's any rubbish books, I'll just DNF them because I'm a DNF king. If I don't enjoy something, I'm not going to force myself to do it just to put a review out there. Anyway, try and just forget the fact that these books are massive, because why read 3 average 400-page books when you could read a 1,200-page masterpiece? I don't get it. The reason that these are accessible, I'm not going to say he don't put a lot of characters into his books. He does. There's loads of characters. There's a lot of world building. There's a lot of places that you're going to go and a lot of different like side stories and main stories. But let me just explain how he does it in a brilliant way. So if you look here, it says part 1. Part 1 follows, I think it followed Shalon, it did, and Kaladin, which are 2 characters. So the entire part 1 of this series, this book at least, follows 2 characters, who is Kaladin, who is basically a slave who is on a bridge crew. So the bridge crews are set up so that when all selfish fellas go to war, they've got these slaves right at the front that put these bridges out so they can run across these massive, I don't even know what they're called, gaps in mountains, if you want to call them, so they can get to the other side on the battlefield and kick off. Kaladin's on there, and it follows his story. And then Shalon is a girl who is like deep into learning. She's trying to find out like the history of the world. There's a lot going on in this world, and her story delves into that. And it's just brilliant. And it does that throughout the story with different parts. So then in another part, you might follow Kaladin and Dalinar, who is another guy that plays a massive part in this story. I just don't find it too overwhelming because of the amount of pages that he puts into the books. He doesn't just cram everything down your throat. He takes his time with it. It isn't like all at once. It's very progressive, the way that the world is built, the way that the characters' backstories are. And I think because of how many pages he gets across all the books, it just gives him that opportunity to take his time with it and not just bombard you with word vomit. So if ever you've thought about getting into Brandon Sanderson, I'm not saying you have to do the Stormlight Archive. Mistborn might be another good place for you to start as well. I read The Final Empire, which is book 1 in the Mistborn trilogy, and I read book 1 in the Stormlight Archive. For me personally, I enjoyed the Stormlight Archive more, and I think it's just because there are better characters. I'm character driven. I say this to you all the time. In any series that I read, I'm characters first. If I love the characters, I'll probably be able to get through like slower plots because I'll just be like, yeah, but I'm with my dude. Or dudette, whichever one I'm loving at the time. Read it. Really, really good. Yes, it's massive, but I still think you should try it. This book, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, spectacular. I say spectacular, I rated it 4-star, but I'll tell you why I rated it 4-star. These characters in this series are probably the best characters I've come across in fantasy. Joe Abercrombie is a master when it comes to not just characters because they're funny and stuff like that, but characters that make you think about human nature and why we act the way that we act and how trauma affects you and things like that. This is a fantasy series called the First Law Trilogy. This is called The Blade Itself, which is book 1 in that trilogy. It's the only one I've read. The only reason I've not dived straight into book 2 is because it is a little bit slower on the plot, although I have been told that book 2 and book 3 pick up the pace. So at some point I'll pick it up, but just because this was a little bit slower, it just didn't scream, read me, book 2 that is. This follows, on a similar vein to the others, it follows a few different characters whose stories kind of all start to intermingle as you get towards the middle, towards end of the book. You've got Glockter, who is a torturer, if you want to call him that. Used to be rated hard, got captured, sent to prison. They messed him up. He's like missing loads of teeth. He can hardly walk. He poos himself. He's disabled. He's petrified. His only enemy is stairs, basically. But the inner monologue that man has during that book has never made me, no book has ever made me consider, as much as this book has, how difficult life is for someone with a disability. Like the way that Joe Abercrombie describes a fear of stairs and getting out of bed in the morning and, you know, being able to attend a meeting or walk a great distance to get somewhere. It's just spectacular. Honestly, the way that he's written Glockter just makes you grateful for the fact that, you know, I've got 2 working legs and 2 working arms. I'm like, brilliant. But I think it also makes you more understanding for people with disabilities. Fantastic. One of the best character arcs I've read, in a book 1 at least. Then you've got Logan Nine Fingers, who has got 9 fingers. He's, again, rated hard. He's one of the Northmen, which this world's set up where the Northmen are known to be like really aggressive, almost animal-like humans. At least that's the way I see it. I don't know if they're maybe non-human, but they're massive. They're like radar, they're gross, and he's one of them. He used to be part of a gang, but he lost them all right at the start of the book, and he's like, oh, I'm all alone. There's no one here beside me. That's from Shrek. And yeah, he's just on his Billy No Mates trying to survive in this horrible world. I imagine it to be like the wilderness, freezing cold, horrible. There's these horrible creatures around. He's got to try and send to Jesus, and then he bumps into a character that's been sent by a magi, and it's brilliant. Really good storyline. The magi person that he's trying to bump into, who is called Baez, he's really cool. He's funny. Like, all the characters just seem so unique. You can tell that the author has sat down before he's written this book, and he's almost spent days, if not weeks and months, just writing these characters, the kind of personalities they've got, how they'd react to certain situations, and it's just consistent throughout the book. It is. You've then got another character called Giselle, who is, I still can't figure it out, but I feel like he's some sort of royal person's son. He's a spoilt brat, just a spoilt, selfish arsehole. His storyline, as crazy as it sounds, is mainly like linked to fencing, you know, like where they do and try and poke people with sticks. He's doing like fencing practice so that he can enter this tournament where he's going to try and whoop this retard guy's ass. But again, his story is very much character focused, so it's about a young lad who's just a selfish asshole, and he's been given everything he wants in life. He takes from people that can't afford to be taken from, and it's interesting. It's one of them character arcs that you like, you hate him, but I can tell that Abercrombie might be able to do something with him to make me be like, oh, it's so nice to see him grow. So his storyline's really interesting. So far, 3 storylines, all really interesting. About halfway through, there's another girl that comes in. I think her name's Sarah or something. At this point, I was like, whoa, hold on, sailor. Who's this person? I've just read like 270 pages and she didn't exist. Why is she here? Although it was nice to see a female come into the story, I was just like, this is unheard of. You've introduced a new character halfway through. I did go onto Reddit and I'm like, whoa, who's this, peeps? And everyone were like, oh yeah, it's a bit weird. He introduced her halfway through, but she is essential to the story, and eventually you start to see her character grow. So she's an ex-slave. There's a lot of ex-slaves in these stories, isn't there? I do like her. She's badass. She's a stereotypical badass girl who is on a revenge mission. So this, I think, out of all of them, is probably the one that I'd say is the series that would be easiest to get into, in the sense that there's little world building. Now, there is world building. Like, I can imagine being in woods. It's freezing cold. There's water running off mountains. There's trees. There's dirt. There's leaves. But it's not crammed down your throat, and the magic system is subtle. It's not necessarily explained, but it's so simple that it kind of doesn't need to be. And it's just a wicked story of characters and human nature, and it's just easy to read. I find it easy to read. I think anyone can pick this up and just decide within the first maybe 300 pages whether this is going to be a trilogy for you or not. Some of the battle scenes, look, I'm not going to say they're fluffy again. They're quite grim. They're minging. Some of the themes in here are minging, but war's minging, isn't it? It's not meant to be nice. War's vile. Some of the battle scenes in there are vile. So, they're the books that I think you should read if you want to get into fantasy. And if you don't like them, don't tell me. Because that's the kind of energy I'm giving off at the minute. I don't want to know if you don't love books that I love. I do want to know if you love books I've recommended, though, because that makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Anyway, these are books that I really want to read, and for one reason or another I've not picked up, but I do really want to read them. Starting with The Dragon Rider. You're going to have to accept that I don't know much about these books, because I try to avoid the internet, because spoilers are a thing. Even when people go like, oh, spoiler blocker on videos, the next comment, you're like, oh, someone's like, oh, he dies at the end, and I'm like, oh, you twat! Can't read that now because I know. So I try my best to just avoid all comments, because there's people out there that are truly trying to get us. They're like, I'm going to ruin your story, and I'm not going to let them. Dragon Rider by Taran Matharu. I think this is another story about a slave and dragons. I'm going to read the blurb to you, because that's all I know about this book. The blurb sounds class. Jay has spent his life forced to serve the cruel empire that killed his family and now rules his people. So yeah, he's a bit of a slave. To grow ever more powerful, the Emperor's young son is betrothed to Princess Erica of the Dance Kingdom, an unconquerable realm where ancient beasts roam. So there's beasts and stuff. Princess brings with her a priceless gift, dragons. Only Danks royalty can bond with these magical beasts to draw on their power and strength. Until now. When the betrothal goes wrong, a bloody coup leads to chaos at court. Finally, Jay has a chance to escape. He flees with a fierce Danks warrior, Frida, but not before stealing a dragon egg. To vanquish the Empire, he must do the impossible, bond with a dragon. Only then can he seize his destiny and seek his revenge. Whoa. So this is basically about a slave who runs away from his slavers, nicks a dragon egg, tries to make it hatch, and then he's like, come on, Atreyu, let's go and kick some ass. It's not called Atreyu, is it? What's the dragon called from Neverending Story? Atreyu's the horse in it. Artax? Or is Atreyu the dragon dog thing? Falcor! So he's basically trying to make Falcor hatch. It's not actually Falcor, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, I've got a lot of energy to burn. And him and Falcor, I don't know if Falcor's hatched yet, because I've not read it, but I'm guessing it hatches. And then him and Falcor go on a mad mission to save a horse from some sinking sand. That's so sad. Oh, rest in peace. He doesn't actually rescue a horse. These are all links to Artax from Neverending Story. Next up, we've got The Grey Bastards by Jonathan French. The front of it says, live in the saddle, die on the hog. I haven't even read the blurb, and I'm not going to read it, because this sounds absolutely wild. It's one of them books that just sounds so ridiculous that it's probably going to be a fun time. All I know is that there's an orc on front, if he is an orc. I always get mixed up with orcs and ogres. I think he's an orc, and I believe they ride around on pigs, like hogs. How mad's that? That's just ridiculous, isn't it? I don't always want to read serious fantasy books. A lot of the time, actually, I don't want to read serious fantasy books, which is why I love Dungeon Crawler Car so much. I just like to have a bit of a stupid time. But someone recommended this to me and said, look, it's actually really good. It's class. And I'm easily influenced. So I don't know why I've not picked it up. It's also only like 400 pages long. So it's one of them fantasy books where you could be like, well, I could kind of read that within maybe a few days and know if I want to carry on the series. So not a huge commitment. If you've read this, tell me how class it is. But without spoilers. I'll be watching you. The Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. Another recommendation from one of you. The amount of books I've got on my shelves that are recommendation from YouTube. My TBR has got so much bigger since starting YouTube. Crazy how big it's got. This, I believe, is the story of the 300. You know the film with Gerard Butler when he's like, "This is Sparta!" That bit. I know it's not as sexy and I don't look as Spartan as they did. But this is that story. And I'm so excited to read it because it popped up on a Reddit. I go on Reddit loads. By the way, if you've not been on Reddit, it's fantastic. The people on there are really respectful. Like when they do spoilers, they do this thing where they blank out the spoilers and stuff so you can't actually see them. You can even go into like spoiler-free discussions. So if you maybe read a book where you're like, I really enjoyed this book, what's similar? Just go on Google and type in, really enjoyed X book. Is there a book that's similar? People will be like, yeah, this book's very similar, loved it. Some really, really cool, friendly people on there. This book got loads of hype and people were saying it's one of the best war stories they've ever read, some of the best battle scenes ever, strategic battles, just a story of 300 great hard blokes taking on an army. What more could you want? That just oozes testosterone, doesn't it? Steaming off them. Sexy men with their nipples out, fighting with spears and stuff. Second to last, we've got Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. I know nothing about this book other than the fact that apparently the build-up to this story is literally like 50 pages long and then it's just non-stop action for the next 2 books. And I was just like, holy heck, that sounds like a bit of me. Desperate to read this. The only reason I haven't is because it's an incomplete series so far and I normally put them off. I want to wait until it's complete so I know that I can get to end because I'm impatient. But I'm going to pick it up just because someone says it's a wild ride. Also, the author is black. I love when I see diverse authors. I think, especially on social media, most authors I come across are just white men or white women. So every now and again, it's nice to read something a bit different. Interesting story for you. My granddad is Jamaican. I know what you're thinking, Tyrone, but you are as pale as a windowsill. Look at my eyes, though. Look how dark they are. They're not the eyes of a white man. I am, in fact, dual heritage. I am half English, quarter Jamaican, quarter Irish. My nan is Irish on my mum's side. My granddad is Jamaican on my dad's side. I don't know him. He left his son, who is my dad. My dad left me. I met my dad when I was 19. Interesting story for the first time. And I picked him up from the train station, took him for a carvery, and I ended up buying it in because I ordered it first. I says, what you have? And he says, well, I'll have a carvery, please. And I thought, you cheeky barstool. Anyway, there's my granddad. I sent him a friend request on Facebook about 3 years ago. He's still not accepted it. I'm not sure if he knows how to accept them or whether he just isn't really interested in getting to know me. And then here's my father. You ready? There's my dad. Look, do we look alike? 1 minute. I'm trying to smile like him. The big teeth. What do you reckon? Anyway, yeah. What a waste man. I don't know him. But I've got a dad, anyway. Oh, this got awkward. Oh, look, I can't just talk about books. I can't just be that page that comes on and just gives book recommendations. I want to get to know you. I want you to get to know me. It's my page, innit? You can read about books anywhere. You can get book recommendations anywhere. But there's only one place that we can get to know each other and have chats like this. Last book on the list. Jade City, bitch. Jade City, bitch. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. There's a song that's called like Rack City or something. Every time I see that, it makes me think of it. By Fonda Lee. This, since I read Sword of Kagan, or Kaigan, I know people pronounce it differently, and also Blood Over Brighthaven, that have got that very like Japanese-inspired feel. I can't help but want to read more books that are like set out that side of the world, like Japan, China, all that feel, the feel that you get from this. And upon finding out a little bit about what this series is about, it feels very much like Rush Hour meets Hogwarts. I don't think that's what they're going for, and obviously no one has said that on planet Earth. But what I'm trying to get to you is, it's like Chinese triad families with magic powers and stuff, and they use green. They're called green bones, and they use jade, the gem jade, to get very hard and powerful, and they can do like very hard stuff, and they move very fast, and they're just they're like scrapping all the time. and there's like family dynamics where different families are fighting, and it's kicking off, and it just sounds right wild. And I've got the full trilogy up on my shelf, and I don't know why I've not read it yet, because there's short chapters, it looks fast paced. Everyone that I've seen review it said it's absolutely class. I'm just mental. And what happens with me is all these books I look at and I think, oh, I'm so excited to read these. And then I'll finish my John Gwynne books and then I'll be like, I'll pick up something completely different, which makes no sense at all. But I keep saying this, there's a reason that I was medicated for as long as I was, because I'm a bit mental. But that's fine. We're all a bit mental in one way or another. My mental traits are just slightly different to maybe some other people's mental traits. This has been loads of fun. I've needed this today. I've had a lot of energy to burn. And I feel like I've burnt a bit of it. I've not burnt all of it. I'm probably going to have to get off here now, read some of my book. I might take my dog for a walk, something like that. Get out, get some fresh air, sniff grass. Touch grass, people. It's so important to get out and touch grass. I love this. I love this community that we're building. I love everything about it. I love having these chats with you. Like, I love talking about books. I love seeing your recommendations. I just love you so bloody much. Anyway, if you've watched till this point, I love you the most. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because it makes me feel all warm and fluffy inside when I can see that the community is building even bigger and bigger and bigger. Bye, Felicia.